We are leading the general plan update for the city of Palmdale. Today's meeting is a joint GPAC and public meeting, and we'll go over ground rules in just a minute. But before we get started, we have Spanish translation today. Alejandra, would you announce how to access the Spanish channel?
Yes. Para interpretación en español, por favor, usen el uso de la mano levantada. En sus controles tienen que hacer clic en donde dice Interpretation, donde está el globo terráqueo. Una vez allí, hacen clic en el idioma que ustedes quieren oír, ya sea inglés o español. Si quieren oír solamente el lenguaje interpretado, tienen que silenciar el audio. Si van a levantar la mano, hagan clic en la manito levantada en los controles o presionen estrella 9 si están en el teléfono. Para bajar la mano, estrella o asterisco 9 si están en el teléfono. Para bajar la mano, vuelvan a hacer clic en la manito. Done.
Thank you, Alejandra. So while folks are switching over to the Spanish channel, I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:33 p.m. And briefly go over the agenda. The purpose of today's meeting is to continue our discussion on goals and policies for various topics that will be included in the general plan. And today is the second of two meetings for land use, housing, and mobility. At our meeting 2 weeks ago, we focused on housing and land use, and today we'll continue the discussion on land use and also discuss mobility. We'll provide a brief overview of where we are in the process, review what we have learned from the technical analysis and heard from the community, and then review and solicit feedback on the key outcomes, goals, and policies. Let's start with some introductions. I'll introduce Carlene Saxton, Director of Economic and Community and Economic Development for the City of Palmdale. Carlene.
Thank you, Simran. Yes, good evening, everyone. Keep it short as we have a lot to get through, but just appreciate everyone's continued participation from especially our GPAC to our members of the public. As Simran said, I'm Carlene Saxton, the Director of Economic and Community Development. We also have Megan Taggart, our Planning Manager, Ben Fiss, our Senior Planner, and Drew Pletcher, our Deputy City Attorney. So we are excited to be here tonight, available for an active discussion in those breakout sessions and ready to go.
Thank you, Carlene. And from the consultant team, we have Melissa Stark with Remy & Associates and our mobility experts from Nelson Nygaard, Megan Beer, and Zach Zabel. You'll hear from both of them in the presentation today. Let's go do roll call for the GPAC members. As I call on you, please unmute yourself and acknowledge that you are here. Tony Avila.
I am here.
Welcome. Juan Blanco isn't here today. Lourdes Everett.
Present. Good evening.
Hey, Colby Estes.
Present. Here.
Laura Gordon.
Here. Laura Gordon. Here.
Teresa Hambra.
Good evening.
Matt Harris.
I'm here.
Aurora Hernandez.
Here.
Pat Hunt.
Still living the dream.
Sherry Kanashiro. I don't think Sherry's here yet. Terry Lamping. I believe she's here. Debbie Rutkowski-Hines.
Here.
And Jason Zink.
Here.
Welcome, everyone. Next, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the first item on our agenda is a review or the adoption of approval of our meeting minutes from the last meeting. Are there any corrections, changes, comments? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Lourdes.
Second.
A second? Thank you, Pat. Melissa, would you launch the poll?
Yes. You should
This,
see oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this poll is for GPAC members only.
I lost my poll. Is there a way to pull it back up?
I don't believe so, but I can note it.
Okay.
We'll note
Okay.
that
Thank you.
you can send me a chat as well.
Okay.
I think we've got everyone, so we're going to close the poll and share the results. We have 100%.
Melissa, lost your audio. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, so let's get started on the rest of the meeting. We'll be stopping several times along the way for any questions that the members of the GPAC or the public might have. We'll also have several questions for you that we'll ask through the poll feature. There'll be additional opportunity for discussion in the breakout rooms, and the members of the public can also share any comments during the public comment at the end of the meeting. So there's, we hope to hear a lot from all of you. So to start with, we have a couple of poll questions for you. This is just a warm up to make sure those who are here for the first time are able to use the feature. Melissa, can you launch the?
Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. Seeing heads nodding. So we're going to launch the second poll. This is for everyone. There's 2 questions here. The first asks, how many general plan related meetings have you attended? Options include, this is my first meeting, 2 to 4 meetings, 5 or more meetings, more than 5 meetings, I'm a GPAC member. If you scroll down, there is a second question that asks, how did you hear about this meeting? And you can select all that apply through the Palmdale 2045 website, YouTube channel, Palmdale magazine, direct email, or I am a GPAC member or other. We'll pause here for a few seconds while folks put in their responses, and then we'll share the results with everyone. Okay, we're going to end the poll and share the results. So for question number 1, how many general plan related meetings have you attended? Most folks, about 56%, are GPAC members. We have 17% who are joining us for the first time, 22% have attended between 2 and 4 meetings, and 6% have attended 5 or more meetings. In terms of how folks heard about this meeting, again, most 56% are GPAC members. We have 11% that heard about it from the Palmdale website. We have 17% who heard about it from direct email, and another 17 that heard about it from another source. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so let's started. So as you know, the general plan is a long-range policy document for the city that's required by the state of California. And the state also establishes what topics a general plan must address. There are 9 topics that are required, and then there are additional topics that a city can consider based on their particular context. So the 9 required topics, 2 of which we are discussing today, are land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, safety, air quality, and environmental justice. This general plan for the city of Palmdale will address some other important and relevant topics that include economic development, military compatibility due to the location of Plant 42, as well as community design. Today, we are focusing on the requirements and goals and policies for land use and mobility, which are both required in our meeting. Over the last 2.5 years, through an extensive community engagement process, we have worked with the community and the GPAC to develop a vision and guiding principles, create land use alternatives, select a preferred plan, and now we are developing the content for the general plan, starting with the goals and policies. So today we are sharing our initial draft of those goals and policies to get your feedback and the community's feedback, and then these will be revised as we write the rest of the document. The policy frameworks are, as I've noted, an interim step, and for each of these topics, we have completed our technical analysis and received specific feedback from you all and the community. And now we are presenting these to you to get additional feedback. I'll pause here for any questions, and also request that those who are in the audience, if you can keep your microphones muted so that there's no background noise that interrupts the meeting. I'll pause for any questions. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand, otherwise we can keep moving along. With regard to the land use background and setting, we presented a more detailed overview at our last meeting, so we will not spend much time on that today. But very briefly, a land use element in a general plan it's a required component, and it designates the type, intensity, and the general distribution of land uses. Land for different uses in the city. And these different categories include housing, businesses, industrial uses, open space, education, public or civic facilities, waste disposal facilities, as well as other categories of public and private use. The land use element provides the long-term vision and goals and policies for the city, which are for the next 20 to 30 years. Based on the community input, the land use element contains a land use framework map, which shows the major components of where different land uses are located within the city. So very briefly, this shows the location of downtown near City Hall, around the transit area, specific plan, and the transit station. 2 health and wellness, three health and wellness districts, one around the Palmdale Medical Center, one around Kaiser, and another on Palmdale Boulevard near 35th Street. It also includes regional commercial uses around the Antelope Valley Mall and a mix of employment uses around Plant 42. The preferred land use plan is shown here, and it establishes what specific land uses are allowed on each and every parcel in the city. The land use chapter is broad and it deals with multiple topics, and these have been detailed in the policy framework that was sent to you for our last meeting. These topics include housing, employment, health and equity, economic development, education, medical uses, and specific plans, as well as community design and transportation and active transportation, which are the two topics we'll focus on in our conversation today. And with that, I will switch. I'll ask Zach to present some of the background for mobility and transportation in the city of Palmdale, and then we'll circle back to the goals and policies for land use, and then for mobility. So Zach, you're up.
Sure, thank you. So looking at the next slide, the first thing to understand is really what is the mobility element. So the mobility element is a required component of the state mandated general plan update process. And the current guidelines advise that the mobility element needs to plan for both a balanced and multimodal transportation network. So that means meeting the needs of all travelers, users of the streets, roads, and highways to provide safe and convenient travel in a manner that is both suitable to the context of the overall general plan. So for our mobility element, we'll be aimed at establishing the city's existing and proposed transportation network out to the next 25 years and making sure that that directly the land use element. And then as part of this project, we also want to, this is in support of other key elements of the general plan that intertwine with transportation, such as community design, health and equity, economic development, parks, recreation, and also air quality and sustainability. And as we begin to talk about particular outcomes for mobility, a lot of those, if they're successful, lead into success in other elements of the general plan. So looking at some of the other items beyond the policy framework that we would address as part of the mobility element on the next slide, our work will also include updates to the circulation network, so mapping for that for the existing and future networks, as well as implementation guidance towards facilitating the policies and actions that we'll review today, both in terms of working within city departments and ensuring the functionality of the roadway network. So a little bit of background for mobility in Palmdale on the next slide. For GPAC members, some of you may have seen a lot of these themes already, but some core things picking up that Palmdale is largely on a suburban grid system with arterials spaced out approximately every mile and secondary arterials spaced out every half mile. So there's some large distances between crossings, and sidewalk covers varies depending on neighborhoods. And then residential areas themselves are mainly designed in the suburban subdivision style, so it's cul-de-sacs or more circuitous street designs. So in some cases, this may make access to collectors and arterial streets more difficult, particularly when it comes to allowing for permeability of those neighborhoods and access for people traveling not with private vehicles. And then signalized intersections along arterials, again, as I mentioned, are often spaced pretty far apart, so that provides limited opportunities for safe crossing distances for pedestrians and also people trying to access bus stops. And then finally, the or a couple more items, the higher speeds on some of these arterials detract from users of the bicycle network and pedestrians. And then finally, in terms of access for commuters, a majority of Palmdale residents travel to work by motor vehicle. A majority of them also travel alone and have relatively long commutes as opposed to communities throughout the region. So looking on the next slide, just at some of the existing plans that help to craft the policy framework, the existing Complete Streets Plan provides guidance, sidewalk amenities moving forward, and the Active Transportation Plan provides the framework for improved bicycle connectivity. And then the Safe Routes to School Master Plan provides guidance for physical improvements and programs that would make walking and biking to schools safer and more appealing. And then finally, the street maintenance policies that are written by the Public Works Maintenance Division to ensure that roadways are maintained properly and provide safe walking areas for the public. And then looking back at the previous goals of the circulation element going back to 1993, a lot of these still resonate today. So looking at providing safe and efficient movement for both goods and people, reducing the number of vehicle trips and vehicle miles traveled, encouraging non-vehicular transportation uses such as walking and biking, as well as promoting opportunities for enhanced rail service in support of commuters and the economy, as well as even looking at bringing local air service to the community as well. So some of the themes that also resonate with this on the next slide as part of our community engagement processes, as well as from the GPAC members as well, and surveys throughout the plan process. Key issues that have arose. So one of the primary ones, again, is those high speeds, which present safety concerns for travelers of all modes on Palmdale's roads, and also areas where there's needed infrastructure improvements and upgrades. Some negative perceptions around accessibility of transit, and also the areas that they serve, maybe some keys, so for example, social service destinations located outside of the city of Palmdale that are key for residents to access, as well as limited mobility for senior citizens or paratransit operations. And then we've also heard that there's been kind of an imbalance of citywide transportation investments between different neighborhoods, and of course, many residents having longer commutes. So with issues, we've also received great input in terms of opportunities. So in terms of improving pedestrian safety and access on roads, looking at how we can better connect folks that need to access social services in both Palmdale and surrounding communities, and also what that means for improving access to essential services. How can we make accessing a grocery store easier by multiple modes, things like that. And some of the solutions that may get us there would be looking at flexible on-demand paratransit service, improving the passenger rider comfort and experience of existing bus routes, and then also looking at working with the operators in terms of how we may increase frequencies and service hours, not just on local bus service, but working with Metrolink, and even the future envisioning of high-speed rail stopping in Palmdale or the regional airport.
That we'll pause for any questions. Yes, Tony. You're still muted.
This question is for Zach in regards to traffic light synchronization. As you know, I mean, traffic light synchronization enables the maximum number of vehicles to pass through the intersections, and obviously reduces stops and delays experienced by motorists. What are we doing in the current process to address the smooth flow of traffic via synchronization?
Zach?
I was just gonna say, I can chime in. I think that's a pretty technical kind of operations detail, and I think we can make note of the importance of, and we have this in some of the drafts that we've been working on, made note of the importance of addressing local operational needs for all modes, and that's one of the specific tools that could be used for that, but not something that we're focused on as we're talking at a higher level about policies in the general plan. So that's something that would make its way into.
And Tony, we can follow up with our traffic team to talk about it in more detail outside of the meeting, if that's helpful.
That's helpful. I'm just curious, because I drove for a long period of time in the city of LA, and boy, I tell you what, when you would go traffic light to traffic light, and there was zero synchronization. I'm sure all of us have gone through that. It was it was dread through that whole process.
Sure.
Sure, Tony. And, I think synchronization is a tool to allow for a smoother flow of traffic. And that's something that gets dealt with at the operational level, as Megan just described. But certainly a goal or a policy can be or should be to maintain flow of traffic or smoothly through the city of Palmdale. So that's something the general plan can address, and then how it's done is an action item that follows.
Fair enough. Thank you. Yes, it does.
Yeah. Debbie?
I just wanted to ask about the housing element. The bullet points mentioned multifamily vertical housing. Are we not addressing single family homes? I'm just kind of curious why that wasn't on the bullet point as well, because we have had discussions about single family homes as well.
The housing element discussion that we had the last time is focused on, the housing element is focused on meeting the state's, the Housing and Community Development Department's requirements for production of affordable housing in the city. It doesn't look holistically at all types of housing. The land use element, which has space allocated for single family housing all across the city. In fact, it maintains existing neighborhoods, allows for additional single family tracts to be built, as well as there are new designations for allowing house form, but slightly higher density, so townhomes, row houses, etc. So the entire spectrum of housing is permitted as far as and represented on the land use map.
Okay, and I have another question too. After talking to our mayor about what some of the state mandates as far as building heights, how many stories buildings are supposed to be and everything, I got to tell you, I'm rather nervous about that when we talk about the housing element, because to some of us, Newsom's is a dystopian future to a lot of us. And so height requirements have always been a big deal in this city because we didn't want to become a high-rise city. And I know Sacramento's resistant to how we're different from other communities, but I feel uncomfortable adopting the state stuff in total, because even our local politicians don't necessarily agree with a lot of that. So I don't know how we can do that in the housing element, but I just want my concern noted because I know it's not just my concern. There's many that have the same. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie.
I'd like to make.
I think that's a debate we are having, not just in Palmdale, but in many communities. The cities, we are handicapped by what we can do because it is state law. But certainly the land use plan here is developed with the context of what Palmdale is today and where it wants to be. The state mandates and the densities that the state thinks could happen in places like the Bay Area are not what are being proposed here. The densities are in keeping with what we have heard from the community and what those numbers what the density numbers need to be to allow the type of housing that we have heard is needed in the city today.
Okay, thank you.
So you're saying that the state mandates are requiring, because of the densities, the higher densities that were being pushed into the, I'm going to use nice words, pushed into the multimodal traffic plan. Because we didn't vote on that. That's not something that we had a choice in. We got the presentation between the current traffic circulation and then the new modal, and we never got to vote on any of that. So I'm not real pleased with this modal thing. It's going to look like Lancaster all over again. I'm going to go into the painting business.
So we actually haven't, I know you have looked at the presentation, but I'd like to give Megan and Zach time to walk us through what the goals and policies are and present what we are recommending. It's a recommendation at this point. We are asking for your input, and then we'll be getting input from the Planning Commission and the City Council before this is final. So there's, as I noted earlier, these are draft recommendations asking for input. So this is the time to share your thoughts and your opinions that we'll take into account as we take the input for the council to give us final direction.
I don't think that our thoughts are reflected in the decision to push the multimodal. I don't think that anybody really thought that was a great idea.
Actually, I think we heard different points of view, and multimodal streets, and Megan and Zach will describe these in more detail. They are not intended to take away from vehicles and movement of vehicles. They are intended to meet state law by providing for complete streets. There's state regulations that say cities need to address in their mobility elements, and Megan, jump in and talk about that a little bit, about addressing users of all kinds of vehicles, pedestrians, seniors, children, people with disabilities, etc.
I don't think it's the fix-all to everything, but in that presentation, it was a presentation of why we're going to like the multimodal. It wasn't a choice, and we didn't get to vote on it. So I'm just letting it be known that I'm not in favor of that system.
Okay, noted. Maribel, could you hold, if you have a quick question about what was presented so far, please go ahead.
So yes, thank you. We're talking regarding the land use and all, and I think I'm not sure who mentioned about the multi-units and all, but I don't remember if in the background slides or any of those slides, there was conversations regarding what parking could look like with all of these, I guess high rises. I don't know, for the multi-units. And if this is the time to kind of bring that up, because one of my concerns is that right now we do have, what seems to be adequate parking in the areas that at least that I've seen. But my fear is that with a lot of these multi-units, that we're not going to have adequate parking allocated, and we're going to run into an issue of a lot of cars kind of piling on top of each other. So that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think my point is driven.
Thank you, Maribel. Parking is something that will be addressed at a policy level in the general plan, and at a regulatory level in the zoning code update that is also being done simultaneously or contemporaneously with the general plan. So the parking requirements will be in line with the density, any type of housing types that are being recommended. So the idea is development projects are self-parked. Melissa, could you launch the poll we have here?
Sure. So you're going to see a new poll up on the screen. This one has 3 separate questions. The first one asks, how has COVID-19 changed your commute patterns? There's several options for you to choose from. The first one is, I will work/learn remotely full-time. I will work/learn remotely part-time. My commute will be shorter. My commute will be longer. My commute is the same. I already worked/learned from home. I am out of work due to the pandemic, or I am unemployed/retired. If you scroll down, you'll see the second question, which asks, which concerns impact you the most? Your options are traffic and congestion, difficulty accessing retail and services, difficulty accessing parks and open space, comfort or safety on public transit, limited on-demand public mobility options, lack of safe walking and biking facilities, long commute times, or air and noise pollution from vehicles. If you continue scrolling down, you'll see the third question, which asks, which opportunities are the most important to you? Options include shorter trips to retail and services, expanded options for safe walking and biking, improved access to bus stops and comfort on existing transit, expanded public transit routes and service hours, more options to commute without driving alone, more frequent and later commuter rail service, including Metrolink, or high-speed rail or passenger air service. We'll pause here for a few seconds. Please submit your responses.
There should be a better traffic flow on number 3. So the answer I'm looking for isn't there.
Thanks, Pat. We'll make note of that.
I think everyone who is going to answer has. Melissa, would you?
Sure. We will close the poll and share the results. So for question number 1, how's COVID-19 changed your commute patterns? 50% of folks said my commute is the same, followed by 19% who said I will work/learn remotely full-time. 13% said they would work/learn remotely part-time, and the rest is split between already working or learning from home, out of work due to the pandemic, or unemployed or retired. For question number 2, which concerns impact you the most? 38% selected traffic and congestion, followed by a split at 19% each for lack of safe walking and biking facilities, and long commute times. And the other options at 13%, comfort or safety on public transit, and the last 2 are split at 6% each, with difficulty accessing retail and services and difficulty accessing parks and open space. Scrolling down to the third question, which opportunities are most important to you? 50% said expanded opportunities for safe walking and biking, followed by 31% who said shorter trips to retail and services. 13% selected high-speed rail or passenger air service, and the last 6% selected expanded public transit routes and service hours.
Can I make a point? On question number
Sure.
3, I think there's a definite distinction between safe walking and safe biking. Those are 2 different type of people. I don't know if that could be broken down further, because I'm more concerned about safe walking and sidewalks and lighting, whereas another person might be more concerned about the biking aspect of it.
That's a good point, Matt. I think we had kind of combined some of these just to keep the list a little shorter, but you're absolutely right. Those who walk or who bike are usually it might be a subset of those who walk. And then secondly, the amenities they would need are different as well. So thank you for raising that. Okay, so let's keep moving. I'm keeping an eye on the time. In the interest of time, I'd like to get through the policy framework discussions for both land use and mobility before we pause for questions again, because I'd like to make sure that we have opportunity in the small groups to have a more detailed discussion. Now that we have established context for the goals and policies on both these topics, let's go into a little bit more detail about what the policy framework is. This is a document that was sent to the GPAC, and it's also available on the project website for review. And this presentation summarizes the document. These goals and policies build on the 1993 general plan and are initial ideas for policy direction. These don't include all the goals, policies, and measures that the final general plan will cover. Rather, they define the general direction on the topic, and then we'll have additional policies and measures that'll be included in the draft general plan. So the direction is what we are asking for your input on, and that's what we'd like to hear from you today. Besides the topics that we present, if there are others that you would like the general plan to address and you don't see them in either the framework document or in the presentation, please let us know, and we can discuss it further and include it as needed. The policy framework is organized by outcomes, goals, and policies. Outcomes generally describe where we want to be in 2045. Goals are an expression of community values and direction. And then the policies are specific statements that guide decision making. With each of these outcomes, we have performance metrics and targets. And one of the aims of the general plan is to support an ongoing assessment of implementation. And so in order to be able to evaluate how successful the general plan is in the future, we are establishing these performance metrics so that the city on a regular basis, annually, biannually, or some other period, can use the data to measure progress. So at the last meeting, we had discussed these major land use outcomes and the related performance metrics. I'll just briefly read these off, but then we want to discuss some of the goals, the land use goals on the following slides. The desired land use outcomes included a balance of jobs and housing growth so that there are opportunities for Palmdale residents to work here and be able to reduce their commutes, which, as we heard earlier, is one of a major issue. Promote mixed income, market rate, as well as affordable housing in the city. Promote walkable and complete neighborhoods where you can get to most services or retail within 20 minutes. A transit-oriented community around the transit station, more housing, especially in downtown, which is the area around the transit station and on Palmdale Boulevard. And then an expansion of aerospace, light industrial, film, and office uses as ways to grow and diversify Palmdale's economy. The goals and policies for land use, there are 22 goals which are in the document, and of those, 14 are listed on the screen here. We had discussed several of these at our last meeting. today we want your input on the 3 which are in the dark blue boxes in the top row. These are pedestrian-oriented, human-scale, and well-landscaped streets, activated Palmdale Boulevard, and improved connectivity in existing neighborhoods. But the other goals and policies which are in the document, we'd like you to review those and provide us feedback either by sending us an email or through the online website that Melissa will describe how to use later on in the meeting. So the first goal we wanted your input on is to encourage new development to be human-scaled and oriented to the street, and for it to create an interesting and active street frontage. And this can be done by encouraging a variety of architectural styles, a mix of housing types and building designs that are high quality with human-scaled articulation and detailing. And by that, I mean, when you have monotonous streetscapes where everything just looks the same, it doesn't create interest. And you want to create an active and interesting street facade so that if there's some, which in and of itself encourages folks to spend more time, walk around and experience the environment that they are in. Policies for encouraging this goal include orienting entries to the public streetscape, providing appropriate street amenities for activation. These can include public spaces like plazas or parks, or improved sidewalks, bicycle lanes where appropriate, street trees for shade, and pedestrian scale lighting to provide for a safe environment in the evening hours. This goal is linked to the goals we had discussed last time about creating complete neighborhoods in the city, and as well as village centers across the city. A critical element would be to provide and improve connectivity to and between these complete neighborhoods with appropriate street designations and street amenities. We'll hear more from Megan and Zach briefly in a bit about this shortly as to what kind of street amenities and street designations can encourage the connectivity between these neighborhoods and to the village centers that are being proposed. The policies prioritize walking, biking, and access to services, open space or public parks within 10 to 20 minutes along streets, bicycle routes, and trails. We are noting these because automobiles are the default today, and the desire is to provide some choice in terms of how people move around. So not that the vehicular cars would go away. That's definitely not the intent. The idea is that in addition to cars, we want to provide people the choices to walk more, or to use their bikes if they so desire.
Am I allowed to say anything?
Not yet. Thank you. We'll have opportunity in the small groups to ask questions and provide your feedback. Thank you. Debbie, if you can hold off on your question or comment till we get to the breakout rooms. The last goal that we wanted your input on today is about Palmdale Boulevard. Palmdale Boulevard is a major corridor in the city. It's envisioned to serve the Palmdale community by being an active and vibrant mixed-use street. It's also the location of two education districts, one at 25th Street and one at 47th Street, as well as one health and wellness district. So there's a lot of proposed new uses proposed along Palmdale Boulevard. And as such, the general plan establishes a long-term goal to revitalize Palmdale Boulevard in several ways. These include considering ways to improve access to private development while still accommodating the street's role as a traffic corridor, reorienting development to be closer to the street with street-facing entrances, requiring street amenities on the sidewalk to improve the pedestrian experience, and creating public plazas and gathering spaces on private development to encourage activation and more outdoor use by its users. I won't read through these slides again, but this is a summary of all the land use goals that we had overviewed in this meeting and the previous meeting, and we have a poll question regarding this. Melissa, if you want to launch that.
Yeah. So our next question is pretty short. We're asking if these goals address the land use outcomes identified for the general plan update. And your options are yes, no, or not sure. I'll pause just for a few seconds. Please go ahead and submit your response, and then we'll share the results with the group. Okay, I think that's everyone. Okay, so you should now see the results from this last poll. We have 47% of folks who said yes, they feel that the goals address land use outcomes identified. 42% say not sure, and 11% say no.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, everyone.
Let's switch over to mobility. Zach, would you like to describe the mobility outcomes?
So I'm going to walk through the mobility outcomes and then some of the policies aimed at achieving those. So the first one is reduction of severe injuries and fatal collisions on the city's roadway network. The second is a more equitable and reliable access to public amenities, services, and opportunities. The third, increase the share of trips in the city made by walking, biking, transit, and shared rides. And the fourth, reduce vehicle miles traveled both per employee. And the last one, increase quality of life and economic competitiveness. So that can mean things like reducing the average commute time or improving local air quality. So on the next slide, looking at some of the performance indicators to assess progress towards achieving these outcomes that would be included as part of the policy framework. Towards addressing some of the indicators on the slide, looking at the travel time it takes to access key destinations by specific modes, so driving, walking, biking, riding transit. Looking at and iteratively updating, looking at the percentage of residents across the city that have access to specific destinations by walking, biking, or transit within a certain time. The students and biking to schools as part of the Safe Routes to School programming. Transit ridership and the share of people walking and biking, as well as vehicle miles traveled and how that equates to potential reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So looking at the goals on the next page, there are 4 in blue that we'll discuss in further detail in just a second. The additional goals on there, build and maintain a transportation system that leverages our natural setting and reduces impacts on the environment. Proactively prepare for the future, so ensuring that implementation of transportation innovations and regional projects align with the city's vision. And then the last one, build and maintain a transportation system that enhances quality of life and public health. So as I said, we're going to focus on 4 of these goals in a little bit more detail, looking at the supportive policies behind them. So the first one on the next slide is build and maintain a transportation system that is safe and comfortable for travelers of all modes, regardless of their age or ability. So this really focuses on policies aimed at supporting complete streets approaches that enable safe, efficient travel for all roadway users, bicycles, pedestrians, transit riders, but also people riding vehicles or carpooling, van pooling. And part of this includes a systematic safety approach, so identifying opportunities to improve safety where conflicts between different travelers or users exist, working towards identifying a high injury network and finding clusters or hotspot locations where collisions are occurring, and trying to identify location-specific countermeasures to improve safety for all roadway users, prioritizing safe routes for vulnerable roadway users such as seniors or persons with disabilities, and then working to revise, adopt, and implement some of the plans that have developed, such as Complete Streets and the Palmdale Bicycle Transportation Plan. And then beyond that, looking at developing in the future and adopting a Vision Zero policy and action plan that really looks at actions to reducing all severe collisions and fatalities related to transportation. So the outcomes for mobility that this address, again, reduce severe injuries and fatal collisions, as well as ensuring that Palmdale is a safe, healthy place to live and work. The next goal we have is aimed at building and maintaining a transportation system that accommodates future growth and maintains acceptable levels of service for all modes. So as we looked at in a previous meeting, classifying streets based on their modal purpose and land use context, prioritizing the safety, operations, and comfort of different modes and balancing those, emphasizing traffic operations that can help address vehicle delays. So looking at some of those questions around traffic signal synchronization, also how we can improve the efficiency of all users, including vehicular travel. Defining transportation analysis guidelines. So this would be looking at site design requirements to better address multimodal connectivity as construction or development occurs. Also looking at ways that the city could possibly leverage those developments in terms of funding multimodal improvements and congestion management strategies to address future growth when it comes to traffic. So the key mobility outcome that this one really addresses is the reduction of vehicle miles travel. It's also in support of greater general plan update visions of the housing options for residents at different stages of their life and ability. And so with this one, Megan's going to talk a little bit further in detail about what prioritizing street modal purpose and context might look like in Palmdale.
Great. Thank you, Zach. So some of this is going to be a little bit familiar because we talked about this, as some of you have already noted, we talked about this in the last time we met with the GPAC. The next few slides provide more detail about how implementing a modal priority network, which we introduced several months ago, can support the goal of building and maintaining a transportation system which accommodates future growth and maintains acceptable levels of service for all modes. This approach to defining how the network functions really supports all of the goals, and I'll talk more about how this addresses the mobility outcomes as well. But this is one direct way to implement the first policy that Zach just listed, classify streets based on modal purpose and land use context. Next slide. So the typical functional classification is used, is focused on vehicle operations, which can sometimes emphasize vehicle capacity over other needs and other purposes that the street serves, and can therefore be an impediment to accommodating future growth. Palmdale's current street classification system does focus on vehicular throughput rather than multimodal connections, which you see here. Palmdale definitions are categories are just slightly different: freeway, expressway, regional arterial, major arterial, and so on. And so what we're proposing is a modal hierarchy, which still does emphasize the importance of all modes, including vehicles, but can help to define the purpose of each street within the network. Next slide. Oh, I think that was too fast. There we go. The modal hierarchy, or the modal priority street network, shifts away from a focus on vehicle operations to a focus on how people move around the city and the various purposes that streets serve, and aims to provide a network that addresses all modes. And different modes and trip types and trip distances can be accommodated on different streets. So we're not saying every mode addresses, or every street addresses every mode, but to take this network approach to identify where each mode can be prioritized to provide the connectivity that's necessary for a thriving Palmdale and for future growth and access and ease of movement at all scales, at the neighborhood, local city streets, and at the regional scale. And this directly supports all of the mobility outcomes that we identified earlier. So just to reinforce what those are: reduce severe injuries and fatal collisions on the city's roadway network, more equitable and reliable access to public amenities, services and opportunities, increased share of trips in the city made by walking, biking, transit, and shared rides, reduce VMT per capita, vehicle miles traveled per capita rather, and per employee, and increase quality of life and economic competitiveness. So the focus on person throughput rather than vehicle operations means that the streets can support people who are traveling by all modes on and through mixed use corridors in commercial areas. And streets can still be wide, but they can be designed to make crossings safer and provide more comfortable pedestrian facilities, more comfortable bike lanes, even for people who may be cautious about riding near fast-moving traffic. The regional facilities provide options to go through Palmdale. The connectors and multimodal streets bring people to village centers, to commercial corridors, to medical centers, and so on. And then the neighborhood streets are for the short neighborhood trips or to connect to the citywide network from residential areas. So we'll talk a little bit more about how these examples or kind of templates for different modal priorities can be applied in the specific context here in Palmdale. Next slide. So the example cross sections that I just presented are intended to be adapted to the specific context of local streets. So to illustrate how these might apply to a couple of unique Palmdale streets, we're going to focus on Palmdale Boulevard and 10th Street West. So I'm going to start with Palmdale Boulevard here. We've identified Palmdale Boulevard as a multimodal street in our recommendations because it's a primary mixed-use corridor, and multimodal access is key to support connections to commercial land uses, downtown, the medical district, and other commercial centers nearby. In this setting, the street design should provide room for vehicles and other modes and sidewalks and street activity. So, want to emphasize Palmdale Boulevard for people who are in a car driving through the city is an important vehicle corridor, but it also serves many other purposes that I've just mentioned and more. But understanding that it's an important kind of like central spine that goes beyond simply vehicle access. So what you see here is a view of the existing street, which includes two very wide vehicle lanes in each direction and a left turn pocket in the middle and sidewalks on either side. Next slide. And here is an illustration of how the right-of-way on Palmdale Boulevard could be reallocated to accommodate more modes. So what you see here is the same number of vehicle lanes. There's still two vehicle lanes in each direction and a center running left turn pocket, but with 11-foot and 12-foot lanes, which is really standard for arterial streets, including streets with the same speed limits and volumes that we see on Palmdale Boulevard. By using those more standard vehicle lane widths, there is significant right-of-way available for other modes. And so with that additional right-of-way, we've added separated bike lanes on each side of the street and maintained the wide sidewalks that are already there. So this means that the crossing distance across vehicle lanes, if you're a pedestrian and you want to get from one side of Palmdale Boulevard to the other, you're crossing, instead of crossing 80 feet of vehicle lanes between curbs, you're crossing 56 feet of vehicle lanes because as you step off the curb, there's a buffered bike lane before you get in front of moving vehicles or hopefully stopped vehicles if you're crossing the street. The bike lanes are inviting to all ages and abilities because there's separation between people who are riding on bikes and people who are walking on the sidewalk and the faster moving cars. So with this layout and dedicated space for multiple modes, sidewalks and street activity, the street serves the land uses and responds to the priorities for different users, including those traveling by car and also by foot and by bike. It also makes it just easier and more inviting to spend time on Palmdale Boulevard and can really contribute to the thriving environment that we've been talking about outside of the mobility element. Next slide. So the second example of how a multimodal street can be adapted to fit the local context and connectivity needs is 10th Street West. And we have identified that multimodal access is key on this street to support access to this primary bus transit corridor. There's already existing bus service, and 10th Street West serves as a significant north-south connector and provides access to key shopping and retail destinations. So what you see here is a view of the existing street with pretty similar dimensions to Palmdale Boulevard. It's a slightly different angle, but there are two very wide vehicle lanes in each direction. There is a center running left turn lane at intersections. So a lot of space to work with. And next slide. There we go. Here is an illustration of how the right-of-way on 10th Street West could be reallocated to support efficient bus service along with other modes. And what you see here is the same number of vehicle lanes, still wide enough for arterial access. These are being shown as 10.5 feet through lanes and a 12-foot left turn pocket. So there's a little extra room for vehicles that are turning. Still pretty standard for an arterial, like I said. And the excess lane width has been reallocated to provide a dedicated bus lane in each direction on this street where transit is really important. So with this layout and dedicated space for bus transit, the bus routes can run efficiently between stops, and they won't impact other modes when they stop for passenger loading and unloading. So this means that there are no private vehicles that are driving behind a bus and have to stop and wait while they're loading. And then once the buses are loaded, they don't have to wait to re-enter a vehicle lane and merge into traffic. So that helps to maintain operations for all modes. And it can also lead to bus travel that's efficient enough to be appealing for people who might have relied on private vehicles in the past. And we know that there are folks who rely on private vehicles even when they are a great expense because there just aren't efficient enough alternatives to driving alone. So I just want to note before I pass it back to Zach that this is the kind of flexible application of a multimodal network that we want to capture in the circulation network map. We aren't focused on the map today. We got to gather your input, and we're still having conversations with city staff about the specific street designations. But the idea here is that each segment of the street network, each corridor or local block has a role in supporting a larger multimodal network across the city. And that will contribute to smoother operations for all modes. And the streets are, for the most part, the existing arterials are quite wide and provide a great deal of flexibility for exactly what that layout can look like, and still dedicating space to the high priority modes. So I'll pass it back to Zach to continue the overview of mobility goals and supporting policies.
Zach, before you present the next slide, I just wanted to add the two examples Megan just described for Palmdale Boulevard and 10th Street West. These are intended to illustrate how we can have different priorities on different streets. These aren't necessarily the final sections proposed for these two particular streets within the city. So please keep that in mind as you as we go through the presentation.
Yep, that's right.
Go ahead,
Thank you,
Zach.
Saren. I may have glossed over that, and I didn't mean to skip that point, but these are simply illustrations for now.
All right,
I just
so
want to make the point real quick that on the north side of Palmdale Boulevard and 10th Street West, you'd have to take out Sizzler and El Toreo in order to make that happen. So these policies might sound good, but you're talking about millions and millions of dollars to buy these properties. And we're going to have a
We're just showing snapshots of potential layout and not a corridor plan. And we're not recommending, you know, acquisition of property in order to put in exactly the way these are drawn. And we can talk about this more in the breakout groups, because I do want to make sure Zach has a chance to finish up the rest of this section.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. We just have a couple of slides.
yeah, just two more sets
left,
of goals
and then
and
we'll
policies.
go to breakout rooms. So go ahead, Zach.
Sorry. So our third one here is build and maintain a transportation system that provides affordable, equitable, and efficient access to employment centers and essential services. So one key policy in this is to make public transportation a convenient and reliable option for daily trip making, both locally and regionally. A core component of that is making sure that frequency and reliability is actually competitive with a private vehicle. One way to do that is to reduce first and last mile barriers to transit. So what is it actually like to walk to your local bus stop? And then prioritizing investments that improve access to high quality jobs. And part of that is working with the local transit operators as well. So looking at working with AVTA to enhance their deployment of services, also what that means in terms of dissemination of information, real-time information, things like that. And then with commuter service operators like Metrolink, looking at working on higher frequency of on-peak services traveling into areas like Los Angeles and other large job centers, as well as later service hours for returning back to Palmdale. And then finally, working with larger employers on transportation demand management programming to help expand their access to non-drive alone commute options or employer benefits for things like rideshare and van pool. So in terms of the mobility outcomes of this gets towards more equitable and reliable access, as well as increasing overall quality of life and economic competitiveness of Palmdale. And then our last goal here today is build and maintain a transportation system that fosters a more active and vibrant downtown, and creating a vibrant and active downtown environment is actually part of some of the more overarching visions and themes of the general plan update. So from the mobility side, this means looking at things like wider sidewalks and plazas for making more of a kind of a placemaking, comfortable environment, as well as having a greater view of public safety and in support of local businesses. What this means in terms of making sure that we're managing parking to making so that businesses can make sure that their customers are accommodated for, and what that means for maximizing the use of existing parking supply to create a park once environment where visitors to downtown can walk to different businesses once they've parked. Also trying to maximize what we have now, because parking structures are very expensive for cities to build. And then also reducing the crossing distances between crossings to make that more safe and easy for folks. Then looking at reallocating some public right-of-way and off-street parking spaces for local restaurants and cultural programming, building on the Alfresco program, and making sure that development intensity and roadway capacity align. So some of the things we already talked about earlier, making sure that if you are bringing in mixed-use housing to the downtown area or other parts of the city, making sure that those are not going to generate an amount of trips that cannot be accommodated, making sure that those developments are also self-parking, so not creating strain on existing neighborhood parking supply, where, for example, on-street parking may be very critical to the residents in those areas. So some of the key outcomes for mobility that this gets towards is both increasing walking, biking, transit, and shared rides across the city by focusing on the downtown area, as well as increasing quality of life and overall economic competitiveness. And then, so bringing it back for this mobility overview, do we have a poll for this one here? Okay, so if we could bring that up.
Sure, we'll go ahead and launch our last poll, which asks, do these goals address the mobility outcomes identified for the general plan update? Your options are yes, no, or not sure. We'll pause for a few more seconds and then share the results with everyone. If you haven't already, please submit your response. We'll go ahead and close the poll now. Okay, you should see the results up on your screen. So when asking if these goals address mobility outcomes identified for the general plan update, 56% said yes, 31% said not sure, and 13% said no. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so now we want to hear from you all, but I'd like to do that in the breakout rooms. We're going to break up into two groups. The GPAC members will stay in the main room, and the members of the public will be in a breakout room. After the discussion, we'll do brief report backs from the discussion. You'll see a pop-up window shortly. Please click to accept and join. You'll be disconnected briefly, and then you'll be in the new room. In the conversation in the breakout room, we have 4 questions we want you to give feedback on. Of course, ask questions about what was presented, but then we want to hear from you about, are there other outcomes we should consider for both land use and mobility? Are there any other policy ideas or goals that should be included? And then of what we have presented, which ones resonated the most? And then if there's something that's missing that we should also include in the general plan and in these elements. And then we'll do report backs, and then we'll go into next steps. So Melissa, if you want to send folks to to the small groups. And I'd also note that if there are Spanish speakers in the audience, if they get sent to a group, if they can come back to the main room, because that's where translation is being provided. And I'll stop sharing the screen so we can all see each other. Okay, as folks are going to the breakout rooms, Debbie, you've been very patient. Please ask your question. You're still muted.
Sorry, had more to do with a comment about one of the slides, and it talked about having a quarter-mile access to trails, schools, or a park. I have a problem with the wording using schools, and here's why. The city of LA uses LA Unified does not have grass on their school grounds. Out here we do. And the city of LA ends up taking some of our park money because they count our school grass as parkland, which diverts, I feel, an unfair amount of money to the city of LA away from the county of LA. So while we do have schools that promote community access, for example, the ones at Greg Anderson, there's a track. At Joe Walker, there's a track. Those are easy for the public to get into and share. And that makes sense to me that you're going to count that as parkland. But when you're counting Rancho Vista School as a park, when I can tell you, as having been a principal in that district, it is not conducive to people coming in off the street and using that. So I kind of have a problem with that wording, because it's assuming that the school that's near you is a school that allows or has, even though they have to have attorney style so people can get in, the public can get in. I can tell you that the use is discouraged at certain schools other than where the tracks are. So that's my comment. I have a problem with that wording, because it really made it difficult for us to get Rancho Vista Park built. There was so much fighting over that park because the city of LA was diverting, I feel, inappropriately our funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. The intent of the statement, and yes, we should reword it so it's clear what the intent is, but the intent was for school-age children to be able to walk to their neighborhood school versus the grounds on the school being available as park space. But I think that since that wasn't clear, that's certainly something we should clarify.
Well, the school district itself, like for example, West Side and East Side or Palmdale has a different policy, but West Side, they've got a 2-mile walk to school distance. So, those goals are in conflict. So I just want to make that known. They're totally in conflict.
I just want to agree with Deborah completely. Like, I'm an adult. I can't go onto an elementary school or a high school and use their facilities. So it shouldn't be schools on there. It should be 90% of our housing should have access to parks or trails leading to parks.
Thank you, Jason. Lourdes, you had a question or comment?
I did earlier, but I just I found it quite interesting what Deborah was just talking about with respect to the count. So I think that would have to probably go to the policy ideas with respect to language and things like that when we have to deal with this. And since it sounds like Debbie's got a wealth of experience, and we can use that experience to be able to form what we need for us to do what we have to do. And sometimes it really takes language and how to go around that and things like that. So, but I do want to say one thing. I'm really excited as far as what we're doing, the multimodal. I know some people don't, I think that we have an opportunity, in my opinion, we have an opportunity to, the state of California is going to make us do it. Sacramento is going to make us do all these little things. And we may as well work within our structure the way that we want our city to look based on what they want us to do, but on our terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Lourdes. Teresa?
Hi, I had a couple items that I wanted to go over. One of them was with collisions on the roadway. Palmdale Boulevard is very dark. I had mentioned that before, and I think lighting is extremely important. It is hard to see pedestrians crossing the street at night. There have been fatalities because of that. And of course, not using the intersections as a crosswalk creates a problem as well as far as the pedestrians are concerned with the motorists. So lighting, we need brighter, better lighting on Palmdale Boulevard for sure. As far as the different types of modalities for the roadways, I understand we want to accommodate all types of people. That's not a problem. And I know these were examples that were given, but we also have to realize that Palmdale Boulevard does have a large bus transportation usage area up and down east-west. So if we have bus lanes and bike lanes, how does that work together? Because I think the busing lanes on Palmdale Boulevard is extremely important, not just on 10th Street West. Also, it also gives access to the Antelope Valley College for students that might not have transportation. They probably will be using the transit system. In the morning before COVID started, I did see a numerous amount of students, high school students, using the bus transportation system on Palmdale Boulevard. So I think that we really have to be mindful of what is the greater usage. Is it the busing? Of course, we can throw in the bike lanes. I have no problem with that, but how do you do both? The other thing is using the existing width of the street in order to accommodate the bus lanes and the bike lanes. Are you using part of the existing roadway, or are you extending the width of it? If you're using the existing part, then will that make the width of the car lanes smaller? Because we still continue to have trucks that are on Palmdale Boulevard, because that's still Highway 138. Okay. And then which downtown area are you referring to? Are you referring to the downtown area that will become the downtown area of the future when you're talking about transportation? The other thing was, one more thing was, as far as building housing, you know, I think that's really important to keep in mind that we want to have that open feel and not have a house that's stacked on a piece of postage stamp land. I know they do that in some other cities, and I think that looks awful. You have no yard. You just have a house that's, you know, multi-use or whatever, and no land. So I think that with Palmdale, one of the reasons I enjoy the area is because I feel like things are spread out, we have room, and we're not stacked on top of each other. So those were things that I was thinking about as the presentation was going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Megan, did you want to respond to some of the comments about Palmdale Boulevard as to how, Teresa raises a good question. Palmdale is a major transit corridor as well, and how would, if the intent is to, how would we accommodate both bicycles and transit on that street if that's actually the intent?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the best answer is after identifying that a street like Palmdale needs to serve multiple modes and that it is part of a multimodal network in the general plan, that there would have to be a follow-up study that's more focused on the specific needs of this corridor. And the general plan is not going to develop the exact layout and cross sections and recommendations for every corridor in the city. We're going to try to find a few example locations where we can say, here's one little moment in the larger street network to capture and what it could look like instead of the way it's set up today. So to really dig in and address the specific needs of the boulevard, more in-depth study would be necessary. But in the meantime, I can offer that as we see in cities all over the country and on streets in Palmdale already, it is not essential to have a dedicated bus lane to have good, reliable transit. And depending on the bus service on any given corridor, the frequency of the bus service and the travel times, buses can be really well integrated into lanes mixed with other vehicles. And so it is possible that the bus service on Palmdale Boulevard would be well suited to be in a shared lane, or that there could be there can also be or intersection designs to help facilitate smooth bus operations at loading areas and at intersections so they don't get, stuck at red lights unnecessarily without having dedicated transit lanes. And so in a corridor, whether it's Palmdale Boulevard or another corridor where there's bus service, and it's also important to accommodate safe bicycle access and pedestrians and so on, there are a lot of different ways to mix those modes into the street. The main idea here is that the way Palmdale Boulevard is designed right now is with a very significant amount of right-of-way that is dedicated only to vehicle lanes and very, very wide vehicle lanes. And that means that there's a lot of room to organize that street differently and get different outcomes. And so figuring out the exact specifics will take a more focused study. And I also just wanted to note in the illustrations that we shared, because you mentioned this also, we were working from rough measurements of the existing distance between curbs, and just wanted to illustrate that you don't have to tear out sidewalks or, change the existing landscaping, but just with the distance between curbs and the extremely wide lanes that are in place right now, there's a lot of room to arrange things differently. And the lane widths that we've presented are wide enough for buses and trucks. The lane widths that exist right now are kind of, just excessively wide at the curbs, or there's like shoulders that aren't that don't have designated space. So that gives a lot of flexibility. Does that cover it? I know there was a lot packed in there.
Yeah, I think that did. Matt, I see your hands up, and then I think Debbie again.
Yeah, I had a few points. After I completely agree with Teresa in regards to lighting. I know we talked about the street safety a few meetings ago, but one of the biggest things that after that meeting, I've been very observant when I'm driving around town, and there's a lot of areas where we don't have sidewalks for not only people walking, but people in wheelchairs and, different modes of transportation. And ironically, I saw someone on 40th Street East on a wheelchair right after our meeting. There's poor lighting, there's no sidewalk, and they're literally in the number 2 lane in a wheelchair. And, just, I can't stress enough, like the sidewalk aspect of it is, I like to see that improved in our city, as well as backfilling a lot of the roads that are one lane. A prime example is, I know it's LA County, but 30th 30th West connecting Palmdale and Lancaster goes to one lane. It baffles me every time I drive down 30th West. One thing I've been noticing in a lot of different towns is flex lanes based on traffic patterns. Either you can't make a right turn or maybe it goes a different direction at different times of the day. I know that I think in Europe and quite other areas have it everywhere, but have we ever thought about that type of modes of transportation with the vehicles, switching lanes for major corridors like, maybe Palmdale Boulevard, 10th Street, West, etc. And my last point, I've been living in the Elen Valley since 1989. And anytime it rained, we experienced heavy flooding. And I know we've both Lancaster and Palmdale spent a lot of money fixing that infrastructure to prevent that. But I can just envision these bus lanes becoming swamps because I've experienced these floods. They're not every year. Obviously, we're in a major drought, but that water comes off that mountain after a heavy snowpack. I mean, there's not much you can do with infrastructure to stop that rain. So just something to think about, especially like 10th Street West with the bus lane. It usually goes from south to north with the flooding. So just something to think about. That's it.
Thank you, Matt. Why don't we go to Aurora next, and then Debbie.
I just wanted to just kind of piggyback off of what Matthew was saying, and I definitely agree with him and Teresa about the lighting. And I think I had mentioned this before, that I had spoken to a lady, and it was like a happy mistake during an outreach activity that we were doing. I accidentally called her house, and so she ended up actually telling me that she was in a wheelchair and she couldn't leave her house because the terrain, the way that the sidewalk was, that she had fallen before. So she was basically just confined to her home, and she would just rely on other people to get her groceries. And so just something to think about. I guess there's always other people whose lives are really, really impacted by the sidewalks and things like that.
Thank you, Aurora. That's certainly the intent behind the recommendations here, to provide adequate pedestrian facilities across the city. So thank you for that. Debbie, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment. It's probably a question more for city staff too. I really loved that outlay, or just the, just kind of the idea of Palmdale Boulevard. I thought that was really fantastic, the way it was, redone. But at least a question that basically that Teresa brought up. We may have room for the trucks, but if we want to have a really nice downtown, do we want the trucks there? And I'm just wondering, do we have the ability to reroute trucks, like, for example, to Avenue P? Is that something that we're allowed to do with the highway designation for our main boulevard? It's just more a question for city. Is that even possible to do that? Thank you.
Carlene, would you like to respond?
Sure. I think I'll kind of take it in segments. So when we think about the downtown, obviously everyone has different visions. One of the things I just bring up again is that we do have the Palmdale Transit Area Specific Plan, which outlines a future downtown along Avenue Q. So at least from my perspective, from living here and being part of it, that's kind of where my mind goes when I think of downtown, or the future downtown of Palmdale. Obviously, Palmdale Boulevard has our name in it, all of that. There's limitations based off of Caltrans involvement. There are conversations with Caltrans around who has ownership over that facility. And then I'm going to actually hand it back to the consultant team on how truck routes are designated. I am not aware of the process, how those get designated. So I'm going to kick it back to Megan or Simran on that one. Hopefully they can answer. And hopefully that answers all of it, Debbie.
Yeah. Megan, why don't you go first, and then I'll add on if needed.
Yeah, well, with the caveat that I am not a truck route specialist, and I wouldn't put anything into a policy framework or a plan without checking, doing a little bit more homework. But my understanding is that trucks can be prohibited on certain roadway segments, and there can be, the cities can identify the roadway segments that are most conducive to truck travel and encourage that they're used as such. And then by identifying prohibited segments, that's how it would be reinforced. So I think there's some flexibility there, and it's definitely something that has in other cities has evolved over time as the kind of like truck access and street function needs have changed. Does that match up with your understanding, Simran?
Yes, and I'll add a couple of more things. By default, most Caltrans facilities have trucks on them. They're designated truck routes. But cities have the ability, as Megan just described, to prohibit trucks on certain segments. So, for example, if the city decided we don't want trucks on Palmdale Boulevard, the city can do so in consultation with Caltrans. That's not to say that's what's being proposed yet, but that's certainly something we should discuss and get more feedback from. And certainly city staff will have a lot of thoughts on this. I know there are some here and others who are not in attendance now. Secondly, we have had in our GPAC previous conversations about where else trucks might go, if not on Palmdale Boulevard. And, there've been one of the options that has come up before is Pear Blossom Highway, is where the truck routes are. Again, it's there are pros and cons to that, and that will need to be discussed in more detail with staff. And then, of course, the city council will have final say on what the direction is on that. So I hope that answers your questions, Debbie. Lourdes?
So with respect to trucks, could we have something similar like Alameda Corridor to be able to shape it in that way? Is it feasible for us to also have roads underneath rather than, so things like that? What would the cost be? Since we are, I don't know, as far as liquefaction with respect to earthquakes and stuff, but I'm sure you guys know pretty much where it's safe to have roadways underneath. But the Alameda Corridor has been working for quite some time. And that might be something that we might want to look at as well for our trucks. I mean, improve the trucks, help some of our business. I mean, we have Amazon, I'm sure they're going to need their delivery trucks to come in and out of here in a more feasible manner to where it's not disturbing us. Thank you.
Thank you, Lourdes. That's a really interesting idea, and we haven't discussed something like the Alameda corridor in Palmdale before. We can certainly discuss it more with staff. I think the reason has been we don't think truck volumes are of the level which would warrant that kind of infrastructure investment. The Alameda corridor is connected to the Port of LA, which is, I think, one of the busiest ports in the nation, if not the world. So I think the volume of traffic, certainly of truck traffic, is different. But I think we'll discuss it more with staff and also think about other ways to direct truck traffic where it's less intrusive to the other functions that we want in our city, because a lot of it is through traffic for the trucks. They're not necessarily starting or ending in Palmdale. There's some, of course, and more so with Amazon, but for the most part, truck traffic is through. Pat, I see your hand up, and then Debbie.
Yeah, truck traffic on Palmdale Boulevard was a topic of the general plan 30 years ago when we put this together. Just a thought, Palmdale Boulevard, Highway 138 is maintained by the state. They control it, they maintain it. If trucks do a substantial amount of damage to streets, and I know the mayor, he's always ranting about trucks off of their truck routes going down streets in Palmdale because they're tearing them up. So I think that we just need to keep our policy that trucks stay on Palmdale Boulevard and off of the city maintained streets so that we don't have to foot the bill for repairing streets.
Thank you for that. Yes, especially for through trucks that are not stopping or originating or stopping in Palmdale, that a single route is which is maintained by Caltrans is probably the way to go. But within the rest of the city, on the city-owned streets, the general plan can have certain streets designated for carrying truck traffic for the reason you just mentioned. Megan, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Just that, there may be other state routes for the through traffic. So you don't necessarily have to choose between funneling them onto Palmdale Boulevard and paying for the wear and tear on local streets. But definitely important to keep that in mind I agree.
Debbie, did you have another comment? No? Okay. Other outcomes or goals and policies that we haven't mentioned that you think the general plan should include? Any thoughts on that?
I have something.
Yes,
Just some
Jason.
comments. Yeah, I don't think we can reimagine Palmdale Boulevard without rerouting the truck traffic. And why couldn't we do 47th to Avenue M as an alternate route? Google probably tells truckers to go that way anyway. The Vision Zero policy, I don't think most people know what that means, probably 99%. So we need to add in parentheses, zero accident policy also next to it. I like the wider streets and the multi-module streets where they're possible. I think the general plan, if possible, should do a study on the mental health of commuters. I don't think commuters have ever been really addressed and their health and the health of the family. And, 4 hours away from the community, that means they can't join community groups and be part of the community. Or, you have all these latchkey kids. And I think it's detrimental. And also, look what it does to the environment as far as smog and congestion, the freeways down below. Every job we create here, every commuter job we create here in Antelope Valley creates a job in the LA Basin for somebody in the LA Basin. So I think that needs to be a point. The rock trucks that come from Pear Blossom to LA, I'd like to see them prohibited during commuter times, if possible. But what we really should do is have the train tracks drive the rock from Pear Blossom to LA, so they don't even have to use the freeway. We should also we should look at a rail line, electric bus line, and bike lane from along the railroad track from a train station out to 4 Points, just like they have in LA. They have electric bus lines and bike lanes where the train tracks are. Also, the train tracks should be put in a trench along Sierra Highway throughout our whole valley, underneath surface streets. And the reason that's is for noise, to make it safer, for traffic accidents, less congestion, less smog, makes it faster. And also we need to look at creating a quiet zone for the railroad tracks that go from Palmdale out to Colton, Pear Blossom. I lived on the east side, and I would tell you, I'm so tired of that horn that the train honks. It's terrible to the health of the community. And it'd be so cheap and easy, probably for about 15 minutes or $15 million, we could, redo the train tracks. Other communities have done this all through the country. So the train doesn't have to honk the horn. It just makes more safety bars and stuff at the train crossings. And then, like he said, Park School. And then, at Avenue R8, I think is just the perfect bikeway, along with the railroad tracks, and Avenue Q is a perfect east-west bikeway for people to get around. There's very little traffic there. There's room to do the bicycle lanes. You can do roundabouts like on 20th East and R8 and other intersections, and make it really safe. And we'd be able to ride our bikes all the way from the train station out to Pete Knight High School safely. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Jason. There's a lot in there, and we're all taking furious notes, and we'll consider those as we move forward. Your point about quiet zones is a really good one, given the number of streets that the rail track crosses. I think that's certainly a policy that we can add to the mobility element. The city is already doing a complete streets plan for Avenue Q, which will have dedicated bike lanes. So that's something that's already in the works. I'm doing a quick time check. I think we are almost out of time for these breakout rooms. Are there any other questions, comments from those we haven't heard from yet before we bring in the public back and do a quick report back?
I got a real quick comment. Consideration for bridges over the train track. I know that Lancaster did that in the late 90s where they did a bridge over Avenue H, and really believe there's one other one. Because if there's any train derailment, our town could be separated quite easily. We don't have many, you'd have to go over Pear Blossom, or very limited on crossing that area.
Thank you, Matt. We'll make a note of that to discuss further with city staff. With the high-speed rail alignment and the Union and the other high-speed rail alignment, there are some recommendations for how the train tracks will be reconfigured to accommodate those rights of way. So I think these are all good thoughts to keep in mind as those recommendations are further explored. And Jason, go ahead and finish your thought, and then we can go to report back.
One thing that kind of upset me was the city's going to spend $8 million. I know they're getting the money from the state or the federal government to redo the crossing on Rancho Vista Boulevard over the railroad tracks. But yet the city is right now lobbying for $30 to $70 million to do an overpass, over the railroad tracks. So here we're going to waste $8 million of taxpayer money when they know that they're planning on tearing that whole thing up and doing an overpass over Rancho Vista Boulevard. I submit that it's cheaper to do the underpasses, in a trench like the city of Reno did up north, in Nevada. To do trenches underneath surface streets is cheaper, and it's more. It's just better policy. And I really think the general plan should look at that and not waste taxpayers' money.
Thank you, Jason. I'm not totally aware of the two projects you described, but we'll discuss it further with city staff. Okay, so I think the breakout, the public is back. Who is doing the report back for that group? Ben, is it you or is it Zach?
I can do it. So we had a great discussion, and thank you for Ben for helping facilitate that. So looking at some additional outcomes that we might want to consider, we talked about both land use, housing, and mobility. So we're kind of all over the place, but the discussion came up about focusing on plans for locations driven on supporting youth and children in the city, noting that the city is currently working on plans for facilities and increasing youth activities, but the recreation components of the general plan element will also consider these needs. We also talked about making sure that we give residents the ability to have access to small and local businesses. So making sure that what's coming in is not just big box stores or chains. And then an outcome for mobility, looking at reducing the speed of traffic when it comes to traffic safety. And then ensuring compatibility of new development with its surroundings. So both when we're talking about heights around existing communities and neighborhoods, also what the traffic parking implications of that might be. So some potential policies that we talked about. How other cities shut down specific streets on Sundays, maybe once every quarter of the year for event like a cyclovia or like a mixed use bike event on the streets, street festivals, things like that. We talked about Avenue Q as a potential location for that, but also making sure that that is set in a way that's actually driving customer traffic and foot traffic to the businesses in that area. And then also we talked about potential solar corridors, not on the books for that, and a general need to improve lighting across the city when it comes to safety and then also ensuring emergency response times. And then in terms of some other topics that we might want to address. So we had a really good discussion just in terms of, we had mentioned the examples from a neighboring city where bike lanes were put down, and how that detracted from the vehicular lanes of travel, but also it wasn't really great for people riding bicycles. We want to make sure that if we are building bicycle facilities, that it's going to create safe and comfortable user experience so that they're actually used, and travel lanes aren't taken away for a facility that's not used. So what that might look like in terms of expanding the trail network, providing access to hiking, things like that. So those are some of the topics that we talked about.
Great, thank you, Zach. I'll do a quick report back from the main room. There were some similar themes and a few other things that we discussed. Certainly the issue of lighting on Palmdale Boulevard as well as other city streets came up. Currently the lighting is, it needs to be upgraded to be more safe for users when it's dark outside. We also heard about needing to add sidewalks in areas that don't have sidewalks now, because those impact the quality of life who live in those areas. Someone shared a story about someone who is a person who's in a wheelchair, but she cannot leave her house because the sidewalk facilities are not adequate for her to be able to leave her property. We also had discussion about what role trucks should play in the future on Palmdale Boulevard, and there were some suggestions about that we'll continue to explore. The idea being that if Palmdale Boulevard, if trucks are rerouted off Palmdale Boulevard, where could they go, and also what the impacts of trucks are on the actual the street bed itself, and the maintenance that comes with truck travel. There were a couple of ideas about where bikeways could be located, and then some comments about considering quiet zones, which are improvements along at the intersections on rail lines, where so that once those improvements are in place, the trains don't have to blow their horns, making it quiet and not have noise impacts on the surrounding residents. Let's see, Megan, what did I miss in this list?
I think you captured it. I was just running through my notes while you were talking. I think, yeah, it's interesting to hear that the breakout room focused on lighting as well, since that was something that we heard from several folks, and just generally, I think some interest in reimagining how we have how arterials are designed. We focused on Palmdale Boulevard in our conversation quite a bit, since that was the example, one of the examples that we brought up tonight, but generally thinking about access for a wider range of users.
Thanks, Megan. We are very close to being out of time, but I wanted to give an opportunity for members of the public for public comment. If we can keep it short to a minute or so. Those who are interested, if you could raise your hands, and then we can get going. I'm not seeing any. Let's go to next steps then. I'll just briefly note that if there are comments that folks think of later, you can email them to the project email address, which is generalplan@cityofpalmdale.org. There are also other opportunities to provide feedback, and these are online on the project website. Melissa, did you want to walk through this tool?
Yeah, so we just wanted to let everyone know that we're utilizing an online tool called Conveo that's embedded in our project website. I'm going to send out the link to that right now in the chat. So on the project website through this link, you'll see the green banner that's listed here. If you go to the next slide, we've uploaded the draft policy frameworks, and we're hoping that you will have an opportunity to review them. And while you're reviewing them, you can actually provide comments directly on the document, as well as see what other folks have commented. If you click one more time, this is what you'll see when you click in the document. You have the option to put your name, your email address, and your comment and submit that. If you click one more time, this is what you'll see when you're reviewing in terms of comments left by other folks. You'll have the opportunity to respond to them, to do a thumbs up or thumbs down if you agree. And it's just a really helpful tool that's very easy to navigate on the project website, all integrated in one place. It's an opportunity to review the policy framework, comment, and see and read what other folks have commented as well. So we have all of the frameworks posted on the project website, and we'll be leaving them up through the end of the summer. And we really hope that you'll take a few minutes to review and comment.
And of course, if you don't want to do that on that online platform, you could send us an email at the address I had mentioned earlier. So very quickly, we have 2 more meetings in this series on the policy frameworks to go. Next week on Thursday night, we'll discuss economic development and military readiness, or military compatibility, as we are renaming that element. And then the following week, we'll talk about health, environmental justice, equity, parks, and public facilities. We will also be giving an update to the Planning Commission on August 12th at their regular meeting, and the City Council at the following week on August 17th. So you're welcome to join those meetings and provide your feedback to the Planning Commission and City Council respectively as well. So in terms of the overall arc of the schedule, we are reviewing the policy frameworks now, followed by the preparation of the actual general plan element. And then we'll be dark for a few months while we are preparing the document, doing internal review with city staff, and then we'll bring back the public review document for the GPAC's input as well as the community's input, and then go into adoption in early spring. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for spending your evening with us and providing us with your thoughtful comments and questions as always. Wish you all a good night, and thank you again. I hope to see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.